Hi, my name is Jim Linnell. I want to show you in this program how we carve and stamp an eagle head. First thing we have to do is prepare our leather. And we're going to moisten it down here with just water. I want to make sure that the moisture gets penetrated into the leather real well, maybe about 1/3 to 1/2 the thickness of the leather. Now that we have our leather case, the first thing we need to do is get the design traced onto the leather. And we need to be really careful when we're doing this to make sure that we get all of the lines transferred as accurately as we can. We want to make sure that we put enough pressure on the tracing so that we get a decent imprint. We want to make sure that we get every line traced into the leather. It's especially important with a design like this that we get all of the little dotted lines, the fine details that you're going to see around the eyes and around the beak. Those are all very important. I've got my tracing material taped down to the leather, but I have one corner here loose so that I can check and make sure that I'm getting the lines clear enough and making sure that they're deep enough as well. Don't try to go overboard on the depth of the tracing. Just make sure that you get a clean, crisp line. Now that we're done, we need to make sure we've gotten all of the lines transferred. It looks like we do, so it's time to proceed to cutting this into the leather. As we begin cutting this into the leather, it's real important that we get certain parts of it cut extremely accurately. Things like the beak and the eye are very important that we get those cut cleanly so that we get a good representation. When cutting the finer details into a design like this, such as the eyeball, we want to cut with a very light hand. The depth that we get here is only going to be about 1/4 of the thickness of the leather. We'll get all of the detail out of it when we do the beveling. But very important that we cut it accurately. There are some lines that we traced that were just dotted lines. Those lines are not going to be cut into the leather. But all of the rest of the lines will be, including each and every one of these feathers that were traced into the leather. When cutting the feathers, we have several different size feathers that need to be cut, and each will be done a little differently. Up here close to the beak, where the feathers touch the beak, we start out with some very short feathers that are just short strokes with the swivel knife. We'll have similar types of cuts like this underneath the eye and out on the beak. And then as we move away from the fine stuff, we're going to have to change our technique a little bit. We're going to have to start actually cutting both sides of each one of these feathers. And on this next size, I'm actually, if you'll notice, I'm actually undercutting a little bit. I have the knife leaned a little to the side so that I get almost a beveled look to the feather as I cut it. Helps to bring it out, helps to give it a little more three-dimension when we do the beveling. And as these feathers get a little larger, I'm going to actually undercut with a little more angle to it. And that's done just by leaning the knife to the side a little bit. You still want to follow these lines as closely as you can so that the feathers don't get distorted. And we'll turn it and cut the other side. And we'll use this technique to cut all of the feathers into the eagle's head. We have all the lines cut into the leather. Notice that we've got the real fine ones up here around the eye, just short strokes with the swivel knife. Have similar kind of cuts around the beak. When we got done with these pointed feathers, we have some rounded feathers here at the bottom. This is where this bald eagle changes from white feathers to brown feathers, and so we'll put a few of those in. These were not cut with the undercut technique, only the pointed ones here that will be white when we get to the finished product. It's now time to begin the beveling to bring out the detail of this bird, and I'm going to start by beveling some of these dotted lines that give us the definition and the 3-dimension for the beak and the mouth area. I'm going to use a figure carving beveler that they're a little bit flatter than a typical beveler, and they're smooth, and they're used both to bevel and to mat with. And we're going to start here by beveling on the bottom side of the beak, and when we cut this into the leather, we had a line that ended right about there, and then it turned into a dotted line. And so we're going to just continue beveling on that dotted line to define his neck a little bit, make that stand out. He has some a roll of skin that lays right along the edge of his mouth here. And we'll use this same beveler to make that roll stand out just a little bit. We'll also use this tool to bevel the inside of the mouth. And you'll notice that some of this beveling is deeper than others. I want the inside of the mouth to look like it's really pushed back in there, so I'm beveling this a bit deeper than I did the fine wrinkle around his mouth. And this is where this matting type of figure carving beveler works real well, is I'll flatten it out and actually push down more of the leather so that we get a shadowed area. We'll get more detailed with a modeling spoon later and smooth out some of these lines. We're just going to rough it in at this point. This bird has a nostril, this little half circle here on his beak, and it needs to be beveled as well. So we'll go to a smaller beveling tool. It's made just like the one I was just using, but it's a better shape to fit inside of this nostril and give us a real sharp definition there. We'll also work on the eye, and when we're doing the eye, we want to work on the inside of this circle that makes up the eye itself. But notice how lightly I'm tapping this tool. I'm very lightly hitting it so that we don't make this look like it's sunken in. And notice that the tool is angled quite a bit. I have it leaned toward me so that the angle of the tool produces a very sharp bevel. We're going to put a little bit of depth out here on the corner at the beginning of the eye. On the back side we'll do the same thing, again leaning it quite a bit. By having the bevel deeper in the corners, it gives us the impression of this being a rounded eyeball here. And again, we'll come back and smooth this up with the modeling spoon. We'll now begin working on the feathers. Where the feathers touch the beak, they obviously stand up a little bit, so the first thing we want to do is to make it look like these feathers kind of stand out against the beak, so we'll bevel across here where these fine lines ended. Make it look like it lays out on top of the beak. And then we'll begin working on these feathers. We'll use that smaller version of the tool, the beveling tool, on these shorter ones. When we get to the longer ones, we'll go to a larger beveler tool. We're just going to very lightly bevel. We're not trying to get a lot of depth right here. We're just wanting to give 3-dimension, make it look like one feather is laying over on top of another. There's a little wedge behind the eye that is part of the eye socket that has to be pressed down. There were some dotted lines here that I just beveled. And again, we're just using that large smooth beveler to do that. We need to bring out those small feathers underneath the eye and around the beak, and we're going to use a small pointed beveler. The number on it is number 902. And we'll use that to bring out these really fine feathers here. We'll just use the very point of it and leaning it up a little bit. I'm just walking it sideways so that I get this jagged beveled cut. And I'm actually beveling into each one of those little cuts that I made to make that stand out. This is how we get that fine fuzzy stuff to look 3-dimensional. We have some of that also right here underneath this roll of skin on his beak. So we'll use the point of the tool to do that as well.